Matthew, I was gonna send you a picture last night, and then we went to dinner and I forgot. I was like, I think it's called like California or something.
No,
It's not gonna be open yet.
We'll try to get, and then we have a barriers and solutions portion of the report.
So you're supposed to actually say this is how risk reduction.
Yeah. Over how many years? So I thought of you and I was like, oh, we'll try it now and see if it's okay. I'll have to do it like one night after I've been drinking, and then I'll be like, okay, I gotta give it a shot. I might be too old for that now, actually.
I always think it sounds like a good idea and it never does.
Yeah.
Your slides.
How do I do it? Like, do I just
Just
push
use the
this one?
arrows. Yeah, the arrows are the best. I think that the down one's better. Yeah. There's yours.
Okay, everyone, if you could take your seats, we're going to finish up. I'm going to get you guys out of here on time. Okay. And can you help me really cut people by 4? Okay, so in this last section, we wanted to give you a brief update on our SB 671 assessment work. And as most of you know, that is a report for the legislature. It's due December 1st, and it will look at the transition to zero emission freight and what kind of infrastructure do we need and when. And right now, what we're looking at is 2025, 2030, 2035, and 2040. But some of our forecasts of freight flows actually go out through 2050. So what I wanted to share actually was our top 6 corridors, because the statute requires that we identify the top 5 corridors with the most diesel pollution and basically the most truck volume and the most contaminants. And so we did do that. I'm in control of the slides. Okay, so this is just a slide saying that basically all of this information is draft and will be through October when the commissioners approve the final report. And so for the top 6 freight corridors, what was our process? How did we identify those? Well, we looked at first the goods that are actually being moved, because as I'm learning from our great consultants, McKinsey, the goods actually dictate what kind of truck will be used and what kind of trip you're going to have. And so there's differences in what you might need for one type of commodity versus another. And so that's actually the driving force behind a lot of the use case that we're trying to figure out. So we looked at that. And then we defined corridors as roads that are over 50 miles in length and have a high concentration of goods movement. And we also looked at what's the natural break point for these corridors. And we did compare a lot of data. So we have FAF5, Freight Analysis Framework data, that's federal data, the Army Corps data. We looked at the truck GPS data and some Caltrans data. And the LB, the Lawrence Berkeley information, we've been coordinating with them as well. So we also looked at, we've started to look at what are the emissions impacts along these corridors. So this is a slide showing a little more detail about the truck trips and the corridors. So again, by commodity type, by vehicle class type, and we looked at classes 4 through 8. By trip type, was it urban, regional, or long haul? And then by the projected powertrain mix, so is it battery electric, is it hydrogen, what's it more likely to be? And so here's the top 6 corridors. I-5 north and all the way from the north of our state to the south, 80 east-west, 99 through the Central Valley, and then 15, 40, and 10. So really looking at those goods that maybe come up from the south of our state and then move east. And we identified corridors that have the top truck VMT and then the top average daily truck traffic. So on the left, you can see the map, and then on the right, you can see a look at the annual VMT by corridor. And so together, these corridors represent over 60% of our daily truck vehicle miles traveled. And one note I wanted to say about this is that we also are including in the corridor the links, the little smaller segments of road that are connecting these main highways to the ports. So like the 710 where it connects from, is it the I-5 that does the 710 that goes into the Port of LA? Yeah, so like for example, the 710, we're including those in these corridors. And I also wanted to point out that even though we don't have a priority corridor running kind of parallel with the US-Mexico border, that area is of concern, not concern, but that is an important area for us. And we are looking at how we can make sure that there's adequate coverage and support for zero-emission vehicles in that area. Well, there we go. Okay, and then in this last slide, we start to look at some of the air quality around these top corridors. So the slide on the left is looking at facilities that generate a lot of GHG emissions, so like industrial facilities, oil refineries, things like that. And you can kind of see that there's a lot of overlap between these facilities and the corridor. So basically, there's a lot of reasons why we see pollution in certain areas, and the trucks is one, and also some facilities like this is another. And then on the right, we've overlapped the corridors with Cal Enviro screens, so you can start to get a look at where some of the worst air quality is in our state. You can kind of see in the Central Valley where 5 and 99 are running parallel is some of the worst air quality in our state. So reducing emissions along these corridors is likely to have a big impact on the exposure to pollution in these areas. And that's really the end of my presentation. We're doing more work. And so at the March Commission meeting, we'll be presenting these corridors, and we'll also be presenting some scenarios about potential stations needed, like how many, what type, and the look at the depot versus public, that kind of thing. But I don't really have answers for you yet because we're actually working on that now, but we will be presenting that in March. But happy to answer any questions about these top corridors. And actually at this time, I'm gonna kind of stop and ask Ben and Wanshu and Dr. Linkoff and Kelsey, Dr. Stoddard, if you guys want to come up here for one last kind of round of any questions that people might have, and then we'll wrap up. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to our speakers. We appreciate your time, and please feel free to email me or any of us if you have any questions, any input, anything like that. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Thank you again for all this. But looking at those top 6 corridors, just curious, knowing on one hand it's California, that's the focus, but seeing they're all going out of the state, sometimes out of the country, how are you thinking about long-term the decisions and implications of working with other states or Mexico and the borders?
Right. Two things come to mind when you said, the first is that we have the FAA, the Commodity Flow Survey data. It looks at national freight flows. So we can have a broader look at origins and destinations that are starting and ending outside of our state. And my understanding is that we do have that. Like, I mean, if we wanted to, we could look at that because FAF 5 has that information. So we can have an indicator of the broader freight flows, but then what do we do with that information? I think two things that I know already that we're thinking about is one, especially by our southern border, we're looking at what impact is this going to have on the companies that are coming in from Mexico, and what kind of infrastructure do they need to make this possible, and is this how can we make sure that we're trying to avoid situations where they might want to relocate their business if they're just, say, going to Arizona and they don't want to buy a zero-emission vehicle to pass through that part of California. So we're trying to look at what are their infrastructure needs, what kind of things might we want to recommend from a policy perspective to try to support that. And then the other is, I don't know if we want to start thinking about places, we need to start thinking about how people are going to transition on our eastern border if they don't, if they can't continue using a zero-emission truck after they pass through. So what does that look like? Are we going to have stations where they transition their trucks back to diesel? I don't know, but we are thinking that through. We don't have a conclusion yet. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add that methodologically, we can do the whole country. Replica data is nationwide. And we look at some border issues, as Hannah mentioned, Mexican border and Eastern border. Maybe Kelsey can say more about that, but I feel that at least in our methodology, we can really cover more. And of course, traffic is not stopping on the California borders.
Oh, Ben, do you want to come up here? I'm sorry. Oh, wait, actually, Dr. Linkoff, can you hand him?
Thanks for the question again. Because this topic overlaps with the current work we have with the Joint Office. We are actually doing this work extending heavy load to the entire nation. There's a definitely good data source for the truck flows, commodity flows nationwide. One data set we're looking at is the freight analysis framework. And pretty recently, there's a new data set from NHTS, National Household Survey. They have a truck origin destination data. Basically, you can derive the trip volumes from, about 350,000 trips from one location in the country to other location in the country. And yeah, stay tuned. We may have updates for the project in the near future.
Well, the other aspects of that, why just limit to the US? Actually, the way we frame this problem and we start using some of these ideas in global supply chain is looking at the issues like, changing supply chains and actually more goods will be coming to eastern side versus California. And this global trend require linkages of this type of models with global economic models. And we do that, for example, to assess foreign impact on some of the supply chains that we use in military settings and construction that we do. So that's all kind of can be used to place what happened in California in the context of US and globally.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious for those of us currently working on, regional plans, or even, larger than just kind of one region. How much of what's been talked about today, how much of the data talked about today is actually available or, is online or available to look at in detail to make sure that as we move forward with our EV transition plans, that we're not, not necessarily specifically using the data that you guys are working on, but not conflicting with it either, and not, presenting something that might be, completely contradictory, locations and such than what you guys are coming up with. So I'm just curious, how ready for prime time is any of the data that's been presented here today?
Right, I'm gonna let, I feel like we're gonna have three different answers, but they're all gonna fall under a version of, eventually it will be available online, but not yet. That's certainly the case with SB 671, but we do post our materials from our commissioner briefings, which would include maps like this one, online on our SB 671 website after we've presented it to the commissioners, and we caveat that it's still draft.
And then will today's presentations, will the PowerPoints be available after this meeting?
My understanding is that yes, they will be. Can you guys confirm that?
I think they are already distributed in your
And
folders.
so we will send that out to the group. And also, we're recording this actually, and so we will post that on our SB 671 website.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
First, just a follow-up comment. I think on your comment about other states, one of the preliminary data sets that you built this off originally was some of the work by the West Coast Collaborative by the US EPA, and that there is a strategic plan that looked at a lot of the alternative energy, let's say, needs for the freight and heavy duty industry, and that it was Washington, Oregon, and California, but that collaborative is expanded to Nevada and Arizona, as I understand, as well. So that's one way that I think some of us in California have been pinging the other states about the CARB regulations and how this is all going to kind of affect California, and we have the hours of service regulations and all of those things that are kind of interrelated. There's also a Western, now I'm blanking, Association of State Highway Transportation Officials that meet, and there's a freight coordination group that we're talking about these issues, as well as there's a collaborative between Oregon, Washington, and California right now talking about truck parking and energy and kind of a lot of truck coordination issues that we meet monthly on. So we've been kind of pinging them. Oh, sorry, I'm Eric Fredericks. I work for the California State Transportation Agency. I forgot to say that up front. So I just was following up on that comment, but I did have a question for Dr. Stoddard from earlier that I noticed near the border, especially north of up on I-5, in one of your earlier presentations, you had a lot of I forget what you call them,
High
hubness.
Yeah.
Right up by the border, and it's kind of a pretty rural area, and even I think was north of a big freight split where I-5 splits off with US 97 going into Oregon. And so I was wondering, maybe is it that it was trying to capture like some of that Oregon destination, and maybe could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd have to double check. I mean, to get a really detailed answer, I'd probably have to go in and see who was assigned to that one. But my guess would be that there's probably trips up in that region that did not have other good places to be assigned to, and so it was one of the early kind of, we'll get a bunch of the ones that are up there that weren't well assigned elsewhere. So it probably appeared early in the sets. But to get a more detailed answer, yeah, I'd have to go in and check exactly who was assigned to that spot.
And did you have a question? Yeah. Okay.
I'm Sam Shelton with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. We're soon to launch a freight study on I-80, I-599 between the Bay Area, Stockton, and the greater Sacramento region. And perhaps this was one of the first meetings that I've heard that anyone doing this modeling requested better land use data and started talking about land use versus just transportation and demand and energy. And that's a key role of what NPOs do, is forecast land use into the future. And at SACOG, we do that at the parcel level for a variety of different scenarios. I'm hoping to chat with you more about the kind of land use information you're looking at, in addition to probably Dave Korsky's question about availability of sharing data. You may not be done yet, but is there some data exchange we could do to improve both our models?
On our side, yeah, we'll have to talk with the commission about, you know, exactly what they're willing to share in terms of our results. But yeah, I think the land use and what kind of siting you want to select is definitely an interesting issue. We'd be willing to talk about more.
Your vacant parcel today could be someone's single-family residential subdivision in the future. We're happy to talk to you about what's on and off the table.
Sounds good.
That's a great offer. We will definitely take you up on that, Sam.
Yes.
And we can share for the Army Corps work, we can share a GIS layer of some of that information. But I don't know if I can put that online right now, but we can email you a link to the GIS file if you want that. For the Lawrence Berkeley, I'm going to have to defer to the CEC on that. So you might want to follow up with me after this, and I can try to connect you to the right person.
Hi, my name is Christian Corby, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the California Electric Transportation Coalition, or CALITC. So first, just want to thank you very much for organizing this and all the great work you're doing. You're funneling a lot of really good information into this report, so we're really looking forward to the results. I was wondering, I had two questions. One, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on how you're determining the split between depot and public charging. And then I was also wondering, after the March Commission meeting, kind of what's the timeline for finalizing the report, or if you have that timeline set yet. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first because that's easier. We're gonna present, we present like different pieces of the report as we go along because there was actually quite a few requirements of this report. And so this infrastructure estimate piece we're presenting as draft in March, but we have other pieces like barriers and solutions and the weight of battery electric vehicles on roads, for example, that we will be bringing to the commissioners along the way. And so we hope to present a final draft in August of this year and then bring it back for to vote for final approval in October so that we can present it to the legislature in December. In terms of the split, we're still working on that, and I might need to refer to one of my colleagues, but I know that one of the things we're looking at is what the CEC's forecast of the public and depot split looks like, but if anyone wants to add anything, feel free.
Basis there is made on a couple of things, right? We look at the different trip lengths and the vehicles that are associated to that, and how likely it is that that vehicle will actually charge in a depot versus public, right? So if you have a long haul truck trip, associated vehicle for that, it will be less likely that it will come back to the origin, and therefore more public charging. When you see the medium duty and the urban trips, then obviously more in depot charging. So and that's how there is an assumption built for all of these trip types and vehicles that are associated with that.
Thank you.
Just to add to the public and depot charger ratios from our research, we are currently still validating the public and charger amounts, and specifically for the depot chargers, we are currently assuming to have a fixed utilization rates, so that the depot charger growth is pretty much similar, like for different years. But for the public chargers, the growth is slower than the depot chargers, as the utilization rates are also growing as we there's for example, this charger is being used 4 times a day, but perhaps in the year 2040 it's being used like 10 or 20 times if it's a high power charger in the public locations. So these are something we are still working on to validate.
Thank you. Catherine, did you have a question?
More of a comment. Catherine Garrison, the California Air Resources Board, and I wanted to thank the CTC for hosting this in-person meeting. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the modelers for presenting your information and sharing that with you. And I too wanted to echo a few statements. Like, I'm super excited, Ben, to hear that you're going to be putting the land use data into heavy load. That's super cool. I already knew about the hydrogen part going in, so that was great. And then just, I work at the California Air Resources Board, and so our mission is to help us meet our health-based federal standards. And so today we're focused on the electrification of trucks, but when we're thinking about land use, just wanted to throw that out there, that CARB, for example, would be our board will consider a locomotive rule at the April hearing. They already adopted a rule for transport refrigeration units. They adopted a rule for commercial hovercraft. There's already a rule in place for vessels when they're at berth to shore power. And then we have more regulations that were included in our 2022 state strategies that will be looking at going zero emission, which includes hydrogen as well as electric. But when we're looking at that land use, just one of the, this is things that keep me up at night, is that, that you drive by areas and you'll see land development changing, right? You'll see more warehouses going in, and the warehouses going in, I'm hoping that those local utilities and the local officials who approve those projects, I'm hoping that they're realizing that, oh, you can't use what they needed 10 years ago for electricity. They're gonna need like maybe double that. You just throwing that out there. So it would be great if you guys help continue that conversation with folks, that when we're moving forward, we need to think of all the different sectors and how that'll look different, and that increased need for the power. For example, on the locomotives, which will be looking at liquid hydrogen, so they'll need more energy to compress the hydrogen to then go on those trains. And so that increased need on our grid is super important. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thanks, Catherine. Oh, Chris.
Thanks, Catherine, if I may. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. What you just mentioned about the liquid hydrogen solutions is definitely related to the next phase work we will have for Senate Bill 643. And I definitely want to stay connected and see how we can, leverage your knowledge in our next phase work. Thanks.
Chris Shimoda, California Trucking Association. So Hannah, just a question first. Can you refresh my memory? Is the 671 assessment going to be updated periodically, or is this a one and done effort?
Just once.
Once, okay. Just something to maybe caveat for the report, as well as the presentation with the commissioners, and I just talked to the folks at Lawrence Berkeley about this, is, and also I think we have some folks that do heavy load in the room as well. The numbers that are currently in heavy load, I know the run that was done for the 2022 SIP actually is underestimating the number of trucks that are proposed to be deployed under Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Fleets pretty severely. So for 2035, I think the number is something like, it's like 56% of what's actually being proposed to be deployed. And so if you have bad data going in, you're going to have bad data coming out of the modeling. And so just a caveat that what is in the 2035 run, unless it's been adjusted, is about half of what is actually proposed to be deployed under those rules. Into the future, those numbers ratchet up very quickly, up to, I think it's like 1.8 million trucks by 2050 under the proposed regulations. And so it's something to just be aware of, that this may give a snapshot for 2030 in 2035, but the numbers even for those years are probably a little bit low. And beyond 2035, and the timing horizons for this stuff are going to be very long. You're talking about major systems upgrades for the electrical grid. It's worth looking into the future and having the modeling actually reflect what's being proposed in the regulations, because if you underestimate by half, you're going to get a pretty skewed picture of what may actually be needed. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. And so in the scenarios that we're working on, we're looking at vehicle numbers from CARB, and they're a combination of the zero emission trucks, 4 to 8 and 7 and 8 tractors that will be on the road as a result of the Advanced Clean Trucks and the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. And then we're looking at those counts for 2025, 2030, 2035, and 2040. So we are, I think, aligned with what CARB would be thinking for those years.
Yeah, just one quick response to that is I know as recently as the 2022 SIP modeling, the numbers were low. So I know that there were some numbers presented at the October board hearing for those dates. So I just do a quick check to make sure that they align. What is being fed into heavy load is actually representative of what's being proposed. Because again, I think that work was done fairly recently for the SIP.
Okay, will do. We are coordinating with Maggie and Quentin, so we'll look.
Great, thanks, Anna.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Maybe just one clarifying question is that what the scenario you mentioned, which generates a projection that has a big difference with our projection, I wonder, is that the vehicle stock number or the charging infrastructure quantity number?
The assumed vehicles, at least and if you look at the original 21-27 assessment, same issue. The number of vehicles for 2035 was low, so your charging scenarios are going to be underestimated as a result. So that's really the issue, is what's being proposed in the regulations. I think for 2035, the number should be, again, it's like 56% of what's actually being proposed from the 2022 SIP run for heavy load. So just double check that what is being done in heavy right now is actually reflective of the numbers that are being proposed.
Okay, we'll look into it. Well, with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for being here and being a part of this work. And if you have any follow-ups, you can feel free to reach out to any of the presenters here, or if you don't have their information and you didn't get it before you left, you can always email me, Hannah Walter at the California Transportation Commission. I have my cards if you need them with any follow-ups or any follow-up questions. Thank you, and we will see you again in the future.
And really quick, before you applaud, I do want to say Hannah brought in all the snacks and treats that were out there, and it's important to thank the person who handles all that. So thank you, Hannah, for today and for...
Thanks to my staff, Kayla and Ken, and my boss, Matthew.